Hello, everyone, and welcome to another fantastic IHC event. I am Kate Bridle, your IHC events host, and I am so thrilled as always to have you with us today. Thank you so much for spending your breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever time it may be for you with us. And special thanks to our wonderful sponsor, Camilio, thanks to whom this session is free for all of you. And I also want to thank our fantastic presenters today, Alex Zilberman and Donovan Bell, who are going to talk to us about playbooks. We're going to have a playbook discussion, the relationship between you, AI, playbooks, who's managing who. These are the questions. Let me know you can see and hear me by popping into that chat, start introducing yourselves, start networking in there. This is our 90-second webinar of the year, and I am wondering if you are here with us for the first time or if you have attended one of our events before. So I'm going to do a quick poll. All right, with that, I will stop talking and hand things over to Alex to get us started.
Thank you so much, Kate. And before we get started, I want to thank Donovan for joining me and leading this discussion. Donovan, you skip one slide. Great, thank you. Really quick about me. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Camilio. We are a legal intelligence platform representing the next generation of what was used to call CLM by enabling you and many other in-house legal professionals connect all their existing legal data into forming the next layer of legal AI memory that can come into account when generating playbooks, redlining, smart repository assembly, and many other aspects of the solution. Without further ado, I would like to invite Donovan to take charge of this conversation and speak to us about his vast experience ranging from his membership at the Clock Board and until recently the head of global legal ops for India. So Donovan, once again, thank you so much for doing this. Looking forward also to meeting you in Vegas later next month in person, and take us away, please.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Alex. And thanks, Kate, for putting this together. This is fantastic. As Alex stated, Donovan Bell, I am a Clock Board member, which is the Corporate Legal Operations Consortium, a professional association, advancing the legal operations discipline worldwide. I've also was fortunate to lead as the head of global legal operations at Intel formerly and currently transitioning to the next step. And so I've spent several years building and running legal operations inside some of the biggest companies in the world. And one of the things that's been true in every single case is that a playbook only works well as the judgment behind it. And so what we're going to be talking about today is what happens when that playbook stops being a document you file away and starts becoming something that actually participates in the deal with you. And so with that, as we start talking about this, one thing I will note is reemphasizing what Kate said is if you have questions or dialogue, I'll be asking some things of you as well. And feel free to engage and enter that in the chat. So at least I know you're listening. And so I'm looking forward to it. So again, most of my career was something that, a playbook was something that you wrote once, maybe revisited once a year if you were disciplined about it. Everybody followed it, whether or not it actually fit the deal in front of them or not. What's changing now in the wave of AI and some of the tools and technology that we have at our disposal is the playbook itself starts learning, right? It can flag what doesn't fit. It can adapt in real time instead of waiting for an annual refresh. And so that's the shift we're going to start walking through today, that transition. So let's first talk about, I'm going to cover about 5 segments as we talk about this from a playbook perspective. So first are guardrails that adapt in real time. Now, static playbook really only gives the reviewer 2 settings. You're either approving it or you're escalating. There's really no middle ground. And that's where the good deals get stuck or the bad ones slip through because someone didn't want to be the one that escalated everything. What works was guardrails that actually widen or narrow based on the real signal in front of you. So you can make that decision based on who the counterparty is or what the deal history looks like or what the actual risk is, not the risk we assumed a year ago, way back when we wrote the rule. And so that's something I'm going to cover some levels of case studies that follow as well to talk through that, because I've done this kind of work directly, rebuilding a playbook around our NDA, a lot of the what we call low-hanging fruit at times. Every mutual NDA used to run through that same review path whether it was a standard vendor paperwork or first time overseas counterparty. We rebuilt the guardrails around a real signal instead. So approved, repeat, low risk counterparties moved on largely standard terms. Now, these new counterparties, non-standard governing law, usually unusual confidentiality carve-outs, those still went to a reviewer. And so the key is the volume needing a human touch dropped sharply, and the reviewer attention concentrated on the request that actually carried the risk. So I'd like to open that up to chat. When you think about these aspects in the playbook, what's one clause in your playbook today that still gets the same treatment regardless of the context? And I'll pause. I'll actually keep going, but I do want some dialogue on this too. When you think about your playbooks today, is there a particular clause that you can think about? I like that survival in term, risk-based framework for marketing material review, because the same things were coming back to legal for review. And I think that's key. When we constantly have that back and forth, it's really important to really try to find what are those signals that really do mean something. Good input, and I appreciate that. So when we think about what's that next segment look like, let's let the exceptions raise their hand here. Most escalations reach your desk because a human had to notice something was off at first. That's reactive by design. Legal is standing at the end of the line, waiting to catch what falls through. And when the playbook can flag its own exceptions, that changes the role. Legal moves from being the tripwire to being the backstop. And that's the difference between reacting to everything and having the bandwidth to think about what actually deserves real judgment. So none of this works, though, if your team doesn't trust why something got flagged or didn't. And that's one key thing I want to kind of hone in on. Trust gets built through visibility, and it starts with the data and the process being sound before you ever handed it over to a tool. And a lot of times that's where people get a little bit protective of trusting sometimes the technology to automate on some of these things because they don't trust it. And so how do we build that trust? You build it with data. You build it with the processes being sound from that aspect. Looking at the chat real quick, we had a risk-based. Oh, I thought there was a statement. Okay, no, so go there. So let's talk about this in practice. So picture a vendor renewal queue where reviewers manually reread every renewal against the prior term, looking for a price change or new liability language. Once the system compared each renewal to its prior version automatically and then flagged only the meaningful deltas, the price beyond the threshold or new liability terms or an added party, then legal only saw the renewals that actually needed judgment. Everything else cleared on its own. And so that's one of the keys is if we can ensure that we're showing legal only the things that need to. And so that's the key. Bottleneck wasn't legal's judgment. It was making legal look at everything to find the few things that mattered. And that's typically where your problems lie is everything gets the same application. Everything gets applied. And so there's a lot of churn that can be avoided when we can find here's the right thing and the most optimal things to look at. And that's where some of the tools can really help you on that. Again, feel free if there's any comments or comments here. Looking here, my issue is that risk assessment can be wildly off. Some colleagues don't realize that something needs to be flagged and won't involve legal until it's too late. Other colleagues come back to me for every single thing, so I get inundated with work. I think that's really where the pain point comes in. And so how do we properly identify what those risks are? And I think that's something that a lot of times we can't depend purely on the tool alone to just do that for us. We have to actually do some thinking and working through our processes and workflows from that aspect to make that decision on what are the things that truly are and raise it up from a leadership perspective of what is our risk tolerance and where do our challenges lie and what are we willing to accept. And I think that's really key. in that conversation. So yeah, question for you all, what's actually landing on your desk today that a well-built system could have caught earlier? Put that in the chat as well, if you wouldn't mind. Good comments in the chat so far, by the way. Cases where we also need to be able to flag certain agreements not automatically renewable. Yeah, good points, good points. All right, so let's talk about consistency. I like that, by the way, Renee. Putting master terms in an NDA, non-solicitation, etc. Good call out. A lot of those things could have been caught and addressed and doesn't require that manual intervention always. So good call out there. So at a low volume, one or two experienced people can hold the whole playbook in their hands and be reasonably consistent. Once you scale, the answer starts depending on who's reviewing that day, how long they've been on the team, honestly, sometimes what kind of day they're having. A living playbook really makes consistency a property of the system instead of a hope about the person. And I want to just emphasize that a lot of times where that dependency on tribal knowledge or the specific individuals put your company at risk because you really could systematize some of those key learnings as opposed to constantly waiting for person A to be available and ask, why are we hard on this clause, or why do we have any flexibility over here? It's important to make sure that we can find a way of pulling that information up to having that systematized if possible. So let's talk about an example here. One clause, two answers, one frustrated sales team. This is something I've lived here. So two reviewers on the same team, two different answers to a similar indemnification ask from two similar counterparties in the same month. Sales noticed it before legal did. The fix wasn't better memory. It was writing the standard into the system itself. What the default position is, when it can flex, what needs escalation. And the answer stopped depending on who was in the queue that day. And so that's one key, is making sure that that same question got the same answer regardless of who was in the queue. So question to you all, has volume growth ever exposed kind of that inconsistency that your organization didn't know about? Let's hear about that in the chat. Have you had any situations where once you started really pulling up the cover and looking under the rug, so to speak, you'd find that there are some inconsistencies that you didn't know about? See one good one here. Had a template investment management agreement coupled with periodic calls with the attorneys who worked on those agreements, that reviews could be consistent and stay on top of the new ask from the business. Like that input, John. And I think that's key, is building, how do you build out that system? A lot of that comes with making sure that there's conversation. Let me make that shift to the people aspect of this, is making sure that we don't always operate in silos, but we do cross collaborate to ensure that learning is preserved and carried out throughout. Looking at the chat here. Yeah, inconsistency among legal reviewers, but there may be underlying consistency based on contextual understanding. Can AI differentiate based on different contextual scenarios? I think the key is AI is going to be able to do what you're able to inform and educate on. And so I think there is a manner of kind of providing, you still need to provide that judgment in that context to be able to articulate that. And as we conclude this, you'll get some input from Alex from a tool perspective of what the art of the possible, if you will. And I think that'll be good. Definitely have seen situations where different attorneys approached NDA responses differently. Yep. Especially around whether or not making documents was required. It resulted in internal clients from shopping for the easier attorney. And I felt that before. I've dealt with that as well. You know, the one that's going to give you the yes. And that's where putting this in a system, I think, makes it a lot easier. And again, at the end of the day, the job of doing that is to help reduce risk. And so when you're that consistency at scale is vitally important. So stop renting your own knowledge. Institutional knowledge, I want to talk about that versus individual memory. So when judgment only lives in your most experienced reviewer's hands, it walks out the door with them. How many of us have faced that before, where person A that had all the knowledge of this particular business unit and area, once they left, their hands are up trying to figure out, okay, now does anyone know what the terms were normally that we would deal with on this agreement? And so the key is, how do we avoid that? I've seen that happen. It's not a minor hiccup. It's a real risk to how the function runs. And so building that judgment into your playbook really turns that individual knowledge into institutional knowledge. And so what that means is, when you have a new hire or someone stepping into a shifted role, it isn't starting from zero, right? You're able to circumvent that. So question to you all, what happens to your playbook the day your most experienced reviewer leaves? And so as you think about that, put that in the chat. What are some of the things that happen there? One of the things specifically, I've been part of an organization that shifted its legal support model, where you had people that were plugged in, aligned to a particular area of business. And then due to business imperatives shifting, maybe even size of department shifting in those aspects, or because of attrition, you might need to shift to more of a pooled resource model. And so that's a business strategy decision. And if you've only ever leaned on tribal knowledge, that shift blows up as soon as it's on contact. One of the key things is we've had to translate the years of that individual judgment into documented guardrails before that transition could actually work. And when that due diligence has actually been done, the beauty is, once we did that, new team members could pick up work without starting from zero. And that transition doesn't just stall waiting on any one person's calendar. Let's talk about that, though. What are some of the things that you've seen as a result of maybe an organizational shift, business imperative shift, or anything like that, where you have to now make sure that you're not leaning on that tribal knowledge? Have any of you had that experience? Let's see the chat if anyone's speaking up. Too many times. It's something that's love to hear some of your war stories that are out there too, if you're willing to put them in the chat. I think that's one thing to really be mindful of, is what does that actually look like, though, documenting it? It's easy to say it, and I want to just pause a little bit on that, is talking about that shifting from individual knowledge to institutional knowledge. What is it that you're actually documenting? Again, I think it's being able to have the ability to go back into prior contracts, historical contracts, and what was done, even looking at it from a matter perspective of what went into the negotiation to shift the terms, and really capturing that. The thing that I'm happy from a technology perspective is there are those capabilities to look at your data and extrapolate some of that information to give prescribed playbook guidance on that front. And then that becomes something that you have conversation across your division and your team to say, okay, does this sound right? Again, the key is being proactive. Now, the tough part is sometimes we don't have the luxury of that proactivity. Again, maybe because of attrition, or maybe because shifts have changed in the business. But it's vital to think about that up front and try to capture as much of that data into your playbooks as possible. Any questions on this topic for those that have had war stories, or those that have questions about how to anticipate that? Great question mentioned here on how to get senior leadership to buy into taking the time to do this. One of the key things is, one, showcasing. It starts with it's being a good storyteller. I think more than anything is there's true value obtained by retaining this. And if you can give them the pain of the indecision, I'll say, I think that's where the key is. What fails if you lose in this institutional knowledge? How cumbersome or how inefficient do you then become? And being able to articulate that. But the key is, what the data usually solves all problems. And from a standpoint of, if you're able to have material data that showcases, hey, here's how long it takes to work through these deals, or Here's how many times we've had a similar type deal and how many times we've repeated ourselves. And here's true savings from either a cost, from a time, or even from a risk perspective. Hey, had we been able to capture this, we would not have recreated the wheel several times. And so it's a matter of being able to have those metrics from your contracts. And so gaining that intelligence and insights from your contract data to where you can then articulate again the pain of that indecision of not moving forward. I think that's something that's been successful in my experience to get some of the support to it. The challenge is taking the time is tough because we're trying to feel it. Everyone's always overbooked and overloaded. And so it does require some level of discipline. But if you can, one, articulate the pain of the indecision, and two, showcase the value from optimized process or leveraging the playbook and how it actually has helped reduce prior time, I think that's something that's key. How much time does implementing a better system take? It's a good question. I think, it depends on the scenario, the situation that you're dealing with. But the key is this: what's the pain involved by not improving that system as well? And so I think it's constantly keep holding yourself to a relentless improvement. And how do we constantly hold ourselves accountable to getting better and doing things better? I like that statement that was made by Kai there. I think it's an ongoing process. Building the new plane while flying the old. It can be a tricky situation, but it is something that does require nuance. And I think continuous conversation. And I think that's also why it's important to have metrics on your data and be able to report that out successfully. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about automating. Not everything deserves the same hands. The question isn't whether to automate, really. It's where the guardrails sit. How do we automate the volume? How do we automate the formatting checks, the standard clause matching, routine renewals, those low risk repeat counterparties, keeping humans in judgment? So we have to keep humans on the judgment pieces. And that's your novel risk, your strategic counterparties. Anything that sets precedent, right? And then ultimately the final sign off. That's not something I've always heard. There's a term that you can't delegate accountability. And I think there's some truth to that, is that final sign off isn't something you can just automate. And so that line isn't permanent though. You revisit it as the system earns trust and as real outcomes prove it out. And so I'll underline this: deciding where that line sits is a leadership decision. It's not a procurement decision. Whoever draws it is accountable for it. And like I said, you can't delegate accountability from that aspect. And so let's talk about that a little bit. Where do you find some of the challenges? Because especially now, we're in a world where we're constantly being pressured to use AI. And it's almost just stated, and not necessarily directive from a standpoint of here's specifically the pain and challenge that needs to be articulated. And I want to take a step back on that. And when we think about automating, one key aspect of that, some people think when it comes to automating, you just bring in a tool and push a button, set it to go. My challenge to that is a lot of the automation conversation does require you digging into your own processes. What is it? How is work done today from start to finish? What does that end-to-end happy path look like? And what are the complex exception conditions that happen? And that all goes into as we think about our playbook, how do we build out those facets and aspects? I think that's extremely important to really lock in and hone in on, so that we're not left just guessing and saying, I think we can do this. So again, there are multiple areas that we definitely could say, I don't need to do this. As an attorney, as long as we're able to get these things in place, we can be off to the races. And so again, that's the information that gives us the understanding of whether we can automate or not. But again, where you have the high volume, multiple checks, it's not a good use of that attorney's time to do all of the formatting checks, checking out the standard clauses, going through those aspects that are constantly routine that can be predictable. That's something that I think is going to be really key. Who draws the line on your team today in terms of where you find what gets automated and what doesn't? Do some of you have a legal ops team that does that? Do some of you have key knowledgeable subject matter experts or attorneys that give that guidance? Where does that come from today in your world? And while you guys are thinking about that, let me jump into an example here. So a team I worked with wanted to automate its NDA program, but wasn't sure how far to take it, right? The instinct is always to automate everything or trust nothing, and neither extreme holds up. We automated the formatting, clause matching checks first. So anything with non-standard governing law or unusual carve out stayed with the human. And we would revisit that line quarterly as outcomes proved out what actually needed judgment. And again, that's where that test and learn philosophy, I think, does really work. Is you're not going to always have the answers up front, but if you can say, let's get started and find some quick wins that we can automate, and then we can evaluate along the way. And volume work moved very fast, right? And judgment work got full attention. And the leadership could see exactly where the line sat and why. And so where I get back to that question, who draws that line on your team today? This required a collaborative effort of our operations team, our attorneys. It was not something that was truly just handled in a siloed fashion, but truly collaborative in order to get the proper value out of it. So definitely like to see what some of you have dealt with. But one more thing worth naming here is there are tools now that actually can reverse engineer that playbook from a stack of your own past red lines, right? Showing you where your team has contradicted itself and from a deal perspective. That's not a hypothetical. It's something you can actually run against your own history and see the inconsistency in black and white. So it's important to keep that in mind. And it connects directly to what Alex will be able to walk through as we conclude this part of that session. Looking at the chat here, the struggle is when the line drawers are those furthest away from understanding the actual risks. And I bingo on that. You've got to have the people that are, one, doing the work and understanding it. So you have to have input from your business. In a lot of cases, that's who's actually going to own the risk of that pain. And so that collaborative effort is vitally important to not just look at this in isolation. And that's where I go back to that statement of, it's a leadership decision. It's not a procurement call. Sometimes we've offloaded that decision making on what gets automated, what gets used, what the playbook's built off of. Sometimes that'll get offloaded to procurement. And I don't think that's the right call. I think there has to be a collaborative conversation around that. And I think that's extremely vital to have. Let me pause. Any questions, by the way, as you're going through this? And I do want to emphasize that statement on the bottom there is automation earns trust in stages. So if you can draw that first line conservatively and let the outcomes move it, not hope. So it's important to not try to over-engineer your automation, but do so in ways that help build and enable trust. One of the key things is how do you help promote kind of that psychological safety to use the tools that are out there to automate systems and leverage those playbooks. Building that trust is probably the most critical aspect to making it happen. Okay, so let's talk about the key to deciding that line. Get back to that and emphasize this, but what we automate, the formatting and clause matching checks, routine renewals, low value amendments, the low risk repeat counterparties, there are pattern-based exception flagging. Those things that we can identify and truly have tangible emphasis on that's repeatable, those are the things we automate. Things to keep human. If it's novel or ambiguous risk, we're not sure the level of risk that's there. And it gets back to that statement Kelly had made. You have to make sure that you have the right people that do understand those risks and the pain involved in it. Strategic or high value counterparties, right? There are certain aspects where you do have those exceptions. Anything that sets precedent. So if this is something that's going to be a first time thing, we need to make sure that human stays in the loop for that. And then again, the final sign off and that accountability is key to always keep human, in my opinion. So as we're nearing the closeout of this, I want to give you something tangible to take back. If you're taking one thing out of this and doing something with it Monday morning, but you could say Wednesday in our case, right? The next day, here's where I would recommend you start, right? Audit your playbook for the rules that only exist because that's how you've always done it, right? Ask what's in your playbook only. If it's only because we've done it that way, then maybe we need to check that and ask questions on, is it really the right thing to do? So audit for that inertia, right? It's really important. And the thing is, then you can make the call on where you adjust your risk tolerance from that standpoint, because you might be in a situation where you might want to, in certain cases, entertain more risk, and in some cases you don't, and you want to be very conservative on that front. Make sure that you are truly taking the due diligence to examine all those aspects of your playbook. And again, remove that from your vocabulary of we've always done it that way, right? As we know, the areas of business are constantly changing, right? And what we're seeing, that the waves and aspects of where business is heading and where technology is taking us in a lot of ways, we want to make sure that we are mindful of that. The second piece, ask for the exceptions, right? Ask your team for 30 days of real escalations, right? It'll tell you more than any vendor demo is going to ever give you, right? And so do the look back into where did we have key escalations. A lot of times we're spending a lot of time on things for the potential of an escalation that doesn't happen. And it's really important for us to think about that and really examine, okay, where are we really seeing pain? In past 3 years, we haven't had any escalations on this specific area or clause or whatnot. So why are we constantly going in and doing the manual review for that? Be diligent in examining that in your data and finding out where that friction truly lives. Do you have any questions there? Okay. And then the third, pilot on low risk first. So choose that one low risk clause type and let the playbook flag those exceptions automatically before it touches anything strategic. And so the key is keep the tactical in those areas where you can automate that, but you find that one low risk clause type. So just start there. And I think that's one key. And then you can decide where the human line sits on purpose, right? And before a tool draws that for you by default. So you want to make sure that that's key. And that gets back to that fourth point, is where you draw that line. Be very purposeful about what requires human sign off. And it's really important that I think we capture those areas. So again, in summary, when we think about those 5 segments, right? The guardrails that adapt in real time, right? And so making sure that we know that a static playbook, we want to get out of that static model. It's getting to that evolutionary model where we can understand where those guardrails may widen or narrow based on the signals in front of us. So really be signal driven, as that first segment we talked about. Making that shift from manual escalation to automatic flagging is something else. Making sure that understand that trust gets built through that visibility. And it starts with the data and the process being sound before you've ever handed over to a tool. Then third, we talked about the consistency at scale. And let's make sure that we're constantly having a living playbook that drives that consistency of the system instead of hope about a person, right? From a person's perspective. Fourth, we talked about the institutional knowledge versus individual memory. And so it's really important that we try to build out those systems to capture that institutional knowledge as opposed to being dependent on that individual memory. And then lastly, we talked about what to automate versus where that human in the loop is absolutely necessary. And I think it's key that we remind ourselves that if we start small and start with your lowest risk and automate and capture that data, and so that you can feed that back to leadership on here's the value and here's the argument for us continuing down this path and continuing those type of investments. And then again, here's what to get started on from that aspect. Putting this into play, auditing for inertia, asking for the exceptions, piloting on your low risk first, and then drawing the line on purpose, being very intentional about that. And so that's the judgment side of it as we look at our playbooks and where we're heading with that. I hope this was helpful. I think that's the key. Saying what we can automate and what that looks like sounds good. Seeing what that looks like is even better in terms of seeing what are the tools that are out there, what are the capabilities that are out there, of which I'm excited to see what we can see from a Camilio perspective. But again, just to emphasize, the importance is making sure that we are diligent in thinking through how do we constantly get the most out of these playbooks, and that these playbooks are vitally important because we spend a lot of time on areas that are low risk, and our attorneys spend a lot of time on churning on things, and we're not getting the most output from that value from those teams. And a lot of times we get scared thinking AI is going to take this away or remove this, but it's not that. It's putting you in a place where that human judgment and that criticality of your skill set is best optimized and used. So with that, we'd love to pass it to Alex on that front.
Alex,
Awesome.
take it away.
Oh, no, I'm just going to continue, not taking anything anywhere. But Donovan, thank you so much for everything that you shared, and the structure and the framework that you shared with us. Let me share my screen, and I want to really start by tapping into some of those highlights that you mentioned, some of these instructions that you guided the team here. I'm going to share my screen in a second. All right. Trying to be as efficient and to the point here, not doing any product demos or tours or anything like that. If you are interested in seeing and learning more, please reach out on our website, camilio.ai, or just directly to me on LinkedIn. I'll be more than happy to assign some of my team members or just me myself to walk you through it. So our platform allows you to really aggregate all your legal knowledge in one place. And one of them, because this is the topic of our webinar today, are ebooks. So one thing that Donovan, you just mentioned, which is available in today's world, and I will say it's available in our platform, and there are different levels of this type of solution also in other platforms as well, trying to be like very transparent and honest about it. You can create your own playbooks today, as Donovan instructed, also by looking into what you've done in the past. And we've been developing it from the point of view of understanding that there is a mental playbook that many use that are not necessarily is written down, and of those type of exclusions and fallbacks. But there is also a lot of it that you can develop based on your past red lines that you mentioned, Donovan, or starting from your own template, uploading, selecting what type of playbook you want to create, and then uploading or selecting if you have also a smart repository that's connected to the same place, just initial past contracts, past red lines, and having it generate the playbook for you. So you can do it in Camilio, in other platforms as well. Once you've done that, I think one place that is worth to mention is that one challenge with old-fashioned playbooks is it's very hard to read, understand, and really comprehend what's going on. The way that we've solved it, and there's probably also other tools out there that can do different type of things in this world, is just by analyzing that data and coming up with your positions and fallbacks automatically. So really, once you do that, the next point that Donovan mentioned, which is very important, is being able to get some understanding of how frequently do you use any of these fallbacks. So you have your position, you have your reference clause from your contract, but how many times do you actually tend to fall back to another position, right? In this case, 88%. So it means that, okay, your default position might need some work on it. Now, it's really hard to take a look as a whole on what's going on and how people are actually using your playbooks and how people are actually redlining, unless you have something that helps you connect what people are doing at the end of the day versus what they're instructed to do. So the way that we are doing it is first of all, we devise this playbook automatically based on your data. And then we understand the fallbacks that you're taking. We also allow you to see the reference to the relevant places where you've done that. So you can mentally understand, okay, this is a great example for this type of fallback versus my basic or gold standard position. And the nice thing about it is you can continuously edit and see what's going on. So another thing that we have, which also something Donovan mentioned, is this human in the loop capability that allows you to assemble suggestions that come in based on your playbook rules and allows you to preview how your playbook might look like if you would to take a recommendation or request from any other team member that they are also being compiled by actually using it. So the idea is this allows you to really manage your entire life cycle of your playbook. It doesn't remain stale and continuously update by your team members' feedback and how they actually redline. So you have one clear place where you manage everything and you can use it and reuse it later on. Now, just so you are guys better connected to, okay, once you have this playbook generated for you and you tweak it a bit, what does it do for you? So you can use it in multiple ways. First of all, once you do it, it's a referenceable attribute. It means that you can actually use it anywhere else in the platform. So you can use it in your chat by referencing your playbook. So you can use it and reuse it again. You can use it in directly Microsoft Word add-in. Allows you to really get a review of a contract based on how you do it. Because the power of a platform like ours is the ability to interconnect it with recommendations and with needs in different places. So in this case, you can receive and see your exact redline recommendation based on your exact playbook rules when you're in Word. I'm not going to show you the whole thing. Just I want you to understand how a modern tool can serve these type of guardrails and recommendations that Donovan has spoken about in reality. So anything that you need, any clause that you have here will be reviewed against your playbook and will give you surgical red lines based on that. Another thing that we do, which is a little bit outside of the scope of the playbook, is also red flag recommendation. We also take a look at your contract as a whole, making sure that you didn't miss anything, because when you actually apply a recommendation that we will find from our objective search, we will flag it as a suggestion to add it as a playbook rule. So as you continuously use it, we'll track and help you find out those things that it's otherwise hard to find out. Another thing that we have here, which is interesting to understand and also connects to the playbook concept, is the deal context, because everything is repeatable. And I think this is the real power of a true connected system, of a legal intelligence platform. If we constantly meet the same things, we have a playbook that will make sure that we are aligned with our recommendation. That's great. Sometimes we just want to understand, have I done business with this counterparty before? It's outside of the realm of the specific playbook. It's actually a different world, which is also very interesting, deal context. One click will show you all the previously negotiated contract with the same counterparty, which is very crucial context when you're actually negotiating this deal, not a deal. And what we do, we allow you to either send it as a context to the agent and say something like, compare the business terms of these. So now in one click, you actually compare the business terms or the legal terms or the limitation of liability, or whatever you want, directly in Microsoft Word, referencing something you signed 2 years ago with the same counterparty, because the matching has been done behind the scenes. And this is like another take off on the playbook idea. It's the same idea, just being manifested in a different way by being able to leverage the legal intelligence view. So it will compare the current draft versus other executed contract, will show you the difference, and you can actually go and say, come up with red lines to adjust. So it will actually come up with relevant red lines to adjust what you have here versus what you've done in the past. So it's another perspective on Playbook, and I'm showing it on purpose because I find it very interesting that the world knows and already embraced the concept of playbooks. We've built a whole infrastructure and interface around it. That's, as you saw, it's pretty robust. But the idea of having a legal intelligence platform that connects everything you've done, not just based on playbook, I think that's the real power of something that you can leverage when you have the right context in mind. So you can even do it manually without Camilo. You can go to your library of contracts, find the relevant contract, go to the agent, upload it, give it the context, and do it manually. Of course, when you do it like this, you have a very clear understanding of what did you do then versus what you have now. And in 5 minutes time, you'll probably be done reviewing this contract, not just based on how you want to usually do that, but what you've done in the past. And there are many other capabilities that our word adding allows you to connect you to other parts of the platform, proofreading, stuff that people also like. I'll let it run while I'll show some of the other stuff. So that's something that I really wanted to highlight based on the context of the playbook. Probably one last thing before I let you guys go. I don't want to waste all of your time.
Real quick, Alex, there is a question too. Are you
Oh,
able to have separate playbooks by client? Was the question.
okay, wait 1 second. Let's see the question. Oh, sorry. Oh, right. Are you able to have separate playbooks by client? Yeah, so very important to note, our primary target audience is in-house legal teams, which they have one customer, and it's the company they're working for. Donovan, for you, it was Intel, right? So you care about that. Now, we do have the ability to allow you to input relevant context for every review that you run based on the same playbook. But really, the main customer here, and we have a legal AI memory layer that learns from this interaction. It's better suited, and this is our primary business, really, is in-house legal teams.
One thing to note too, if I
Sure.
could interject, Alex, real quick,
Yeah,
is
no, please.
as seeing all this, and it's always neat to see, especially that reverse engineering of playbooks based on past information. I'll just add to the prior topic on this too, is it's only as good as the data that you have in the system.
Yes.
And so a lot of times talking about how do you prepare, how do you make sure that you're ready to leverage, to automate and those type of things. Your data is essential, making sure you have it in a singular repository, meaning you have it in one place, or at least you know how to find your information. If it's not there, then you can't blame AI for not making the proper conclusions, because a lot of times the error becomes your data cleanliness. And so it's really important and vital that you take those steps to ensure that you have proper information.
Absolutely, Donovan. I love that. That's such an important comment. I'll just say that the way that we're thinking about it is this is an ongoing task that starts with a proper onboarding. So, for example, just clicked in because of your note into our contracts repository page. Every contract that ever crossed your path will be analyzed automatically. All the relevant information from it that you decided it's important for you will be extracted. You will be able to filter by it, but more importantly, and of course, you'll be able to click in any of the contract, see the actual contract, see the metadata, understand what's the reasoning of the AI came up with any question, any answer to any question, what is the original template that was used, who approved it, everything you'll see in one clear place, which is great. But more than that, if now during onboarding you upload multiple contracts, multiple documents, there are duplicates, never signed, not really a contract, different parties, will actually catch that automatically. We see one of the great powers of AI is being able to do the things that you don't want to do manually. Find those things that otherwise humanly impossible. And I'm going to demonstrate one thing which I love. We have something that we call a consolidated view. So by design, contracts are separate documents, and each document is like a PDF file that has some content. And when humans read it, they can start interpret what's the connection between the documents. And it's very hard to know what you don't know. When you click on the consolidated view here, you'll see that some of these have been grouped together automatically, and this shows you that these are actually a group of documents connected to the same deal, allowing you to really get the timeline automatically connected behind the scenes when being uploaded, generated, and created, regardless if they were done by the Camilio Workflows automation platform that we have here that manages all your tasks and all your incoming requests, or whether it was something that you've done by a different system and now you've just uploaded to it. Okay, I've showed enough. I don't want to bore people with the rest. I can probably talk about it 3 more hours and in details. I would love to share more if anybody is interested. Just go to our website, book a demo. It's either me or one of my team members will be there.
Yes, absolutely. Alex, Donovan, thank you both so much. We really appreciate you being here. And thank you again to Camilio for sponsoring the session. We appreciate you as well. And thank you to all of you for showing up and asking your questions and participating and being an awesome audience. We love to see it. You all are great. We always know you're not just putting us on in the background and leaving it and not actually listening. You're such great listeners. We appreciate you. Please go to our upcoming events page, check out what we've got going on. All right. Thank you so much again. Thank you again, Alex and Donovan. Fantastic job. And hopefully we'll see you all in the next one.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it.
Have a
Take
good
care,
one.
everybody.